Time creator, directing lines of signals, line communication. Every time I say space-time creator, it's kind of like a formation location of future line that's already in sequence. It's amazing how every letter, every number, every shape, every symbol that you've come into is already in sequence. Now, putting that position to this platform is to truly understand how to identify that through the communication sending to the grounds, the powers, the atmosphere, the modem, the Wi-Fi, the satellites, the towers, and communication sending all through calculations. Everything that's in track lines of communication sending. Now we're in at the leading line of pattern. Now that pattern lines puts our pathogens or collagens and all lines to how to use our travels and making a location of the mind to come into the acceptance of what's really going on with our system. It's fact to reset our lines of data processing. We can't live in a reality that's already in future adaptation set up for us. It has full access and clearance until we delete everything in settings. You can't live in 2000 lines of 25 sequence in that position thinking that you're in the future adaptations of 2080. You can't get in a line screen adaptation system in position think you're in 2025 and not identifying everything of its past, present, or future. You can't get in high signals and high position operation system until you understand your true authentic self, which is all levels of existing all at once. That's all this is. It's a continuous force that just keeps going and going and going. Now we're in space and time in your systems of your earth, your air, your water, your fire, and your heart direction timeline that bypasses everything in line screen adaptations, getting you guys ready into your T receptions, how you see things, coming to the acceptance of who you're not, and coming to the acceptance who you are in the mind of travel. Now this process is communication system. That's how it's set up in core. Directing in modification grounds, we get into modification lines of the earth line, rotation, surface, interactions. All right. Now, the core line signals, it's kind of like a snake line, but it routes the routers and screen adaptations of processing communication like this interactions. All right. Now, it sets lines of core attractions into 3 lines of provision, 3 set calculations. Now, in that direct signals, we process the zeros and ones in order. Okay. We space it out in 150 meter. That process communication 150 feet. That process in communication system, right? We start up the zeros, ones at the bottom, and then we go around 0, 0, 0, 4, and then we go into 3, and then we go into 3, and then we go into 4, right? So you go into female polarity, positions of male polarity. Then you go into male polarity, female polarity. So it's direct and redirect. Setting lines of signals and 7 graph communication setting on sight lines. Core lines into your interceptions and core center lines of travels. Directing lines of modification system all through calculation system, all through calculation. Process communication lines of zeros, position lines of 1, 1, 1, process equals lines of 1, 1, 2, sets position location of 1, 1, 3, and 1, 1, 4 in setting. In set position lines of travel. Direct communicates high center locations in 144, sets lines of core centers in 144, sets communication line signals in line screen adaptations to 344. That's where we are in track location. Okay, that's how it's set up. All right, so now we're in the north line in line rotations at 144 clocking. We're in the south line of communication at 144 clocking. We're in position lines east-west in position of 144 clocking attractions. Your direct signal is panel operations at 344 platform. Processing communication overline signals in 3 tractions. Directing calculation screen lines into your sonar panels that routes the routers and line screen adaptations into your black holes and track location. Okay? Changing communication grounds, symbolisms, track calculation setting to its setting. All right, very complicated stuff. Center core system and lines of travel and center cross line communication 144 and lines of east and west and travel. Oh, look at that, disappeared. Too fast in traction. All right. Says communication lines of high set position location 3 over lines of 4 and 3 lines of core lines of 4 over 3. Processing communication high centers of travel in communication system and calculations. Now, directing lines of panels, 3 lines of signals, gal calculation high and location earth line, center line, space line in set position. Center core centers lines of travel, in point lines of graph, center core set lines of core centers on travel, directing lines, energetic dome in rotation surface and traction. Okay, that's how it's set up now, right? All right, so you got platforms of E lines, F lines of 4 and travel. And then we got core lines to high set position of 4 lines of sequence in travel. Then we have direct lines of modification models, lines identifications of prototypes in travel. Processing communication high centers of surface and track location. Okay, all through travel. All right, so your central line, your Earth, is now coming into zeros and ones. All right, I just want to show you how powerful it is in sequence. Puts all levels of rotation, circulation in your system and travel. All right. So the core line centers are now set up in routes. Sets lines in sequence, lines of center and set position is calculation. All done by equation. All right. Setting lines of grounds, center lines of surface, and set position. Okay, coming through sequence right here, through panel, operation, surface, and traction. Okay, guys? I know it's complicated, but it's a lot of fun. All right. So once we get into that lines, then we process the road graphs, set position locations into signal line, set lines of rainbow line, set lines of core line into geo line communications, process lines of center communication setting, open sequence, open panel, open lines of Fibonacci and rotation surface, and track location near earth and setting. Process lines of grounds, process lines of center, process lines and atmosphere line screen adaptation. Process lines of tubing and two lines of track locations. Overline sequence, center communication system, all through flywheel and traction. Panels course centers into all line communication of propellers that rotates the setting and travel endpoint lines of atom and traction. Directing lines of atom in line rotation system, all through calculation setting. Gets into the ground line service in 3 lines and 4 and 6 line communications. Process lines into 1, 2, 3, and 4 lines of calculation. Process lines of 1, 2, 3, and 4 lines of calculation system. Process lines of plasma generation lines of coding and platform communications. Ground lines and point lines of docking. Set lines of 0, 0, 4 settings, 3 lines of communication system. Set position of 3 lines of zeros and position of 4 lines of system, 3 lines of high centers. Process and communication lines of question and traction. Then we go back to set calculation, screen lines, adaptation lines of surface. Processing communication high centers and rotation surface and track location system, all through calculation of metric meters. Metric meters is scales, spans communication lines, platform communication lines of surface track locations. Directing core line centers, sets lines of purple, over cross location screen. That's over inhibitors and line screen adaptation. Process line calculation setting, ground lines of processing, platform set, position location settings, set lines of communication lines of surface and tractions, done by equation. All right, so unification line, directing lines and process communication code weaving. Directing and modification grounds, we center communication system all through travel. Purple lines, purple dots, purple sequence, overline cross location lines into divots. Now the divots lines of screen lines of clocking system. This process communication lines of clocking foundations and travel lines. Okay, so we have 4 sequence lines of panels of 1, 4, 4. Setting lines of north, east, west, and south. Now the news, the current events, puts all communication lines into all levels. Processing communication lines infinity, calculation modify in a timelines of sequence of the clock system location to its foundation grounds that puts you lines of communication lines of deleting files and committing all communication setting to no files and track location. Okay, very complicated stuff, but a lot of fun. Then we go in lines of blue. Now the blue plasma lines sets lines of indication lines of pattern that processes communication setting of pi. The pi generates the screen lines and high set position location to a system. Added in 144 track lines and 344. Directing lines and signature lines of screen adaptation lines of service. Processing in communication high centers lines of travel. Directing lines of neural line, core centers and neural links, high center location neuralizing. Directing signal lines of day, month, and year, and process communication setting calculation. Okay. Then we go through divot lines of platforms, red line cycles. We had the red lines, security lines of panels, sets position location setting 144 again. Equals lines of core lines of triangulation lines of 4. Puts the lines of E equals N line. Processing communication lines of ground service. Communicates lines of metric meters and scales and Metatron line direct signals into modification ground lines of foundation clocking that sets all lines of tones and communication setting to your GODs. Processing communication line high centers that process communication system all through travel. All right. Then we go to line screen adaptations to process lines in the green. Now the matrix color lines of system location on plasma screens. Plasmazing walls, electrical line communication lines, and half piping. Process in communication overline sequence in the T receptor. Process in communication system all through travel. Process and line calculation sending high direct signals. Flywheel tractions, programming sequence, and line communication setting calculations. Right? Then we go into box frame. Okay, we open sequence, we open panel, crossing signals, and direct signals modification. That's how it's set up now. All right. So in line screen adaptations, process line centers is a process communication system of center that sets lines calculation setting code sequence in 1, 0, 1 traction, 1 division, 1 location. All right. Platforms E, cross lines of C and travel. Okay. Then we go into signature line screens. Then we go through laser tractions, 0 correlations, and center communications all levels and set tractions. Okay. Now, once we get into that, we change the metric meters to scales. We point lines of graph of truth and position of 3 truth in the travel. Then we go into the course centers lines of blue that sets lines of center communication system open through sequence that overrides the system in travel. Gets in communication setting and communications, right? Then we go in signal lines of 1 in position of 2 into false snares and 3 track locations. All right. Now we add line screen adaptations and process all calculated modify into orange. Now that sequence lines as panels in Fibonacci. 3 travels in point lines of communication to center communications. Sets calculation lines in truth, in position of false, into position of truth, in position of false, into position of truth, 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 and position of false in track locations. It's all set up in T reception. Very, very complicated stuff, guys. Very complicated. All right. All right, so we center line the communication setting to the flywheel track correlation setting. Very powerful. Okay. Now we are override communication setting over relay and line rotation surface interactions. Center core system overrides the system in line signals and process communication setting to travel. Look at that. Too fast. I got to do it again. So you guys are not ready for the frequencies, but I'm showing you exactly how it's set up in travel. All right. Now, this is the center core of your Earth. Okay. Your Earth is in signal and 4 lines of system now. So it's basically traveling line signal location of 60,000 lines miles, 60,000 line miles per second per frame per calculation. Processing line signals to data files sets all communication lines at grounds and set position location to positivity. The positivity line screen adaptation opens all sequence of panels. Now, this is your Earth in rotation system in all communication setting, right? So we go into the central system of your tubing. This clocks your system and foundation lines of your watching in track location. Very powerful stuff. Then we come into this in line communication. Look at that in travel. All right, so we stay in the center line. We center communication over green. This overrides the system in travel, right? Directing lines, we go into truth at lines of 3. The polarities come in line signals into motherboard and travel. 3 lines of signals into calculations, right? There's the polarity of 3, right? Then we overcross line conditions of 4 settings. That puts the male polarity in 4 tractions. Over green and symbolism of transistors over screen adaptations of cybernetics. The process communicates on high core centers line signals. So we go into webbing system into all calculation lines. Now we set lines of sequence, lines of panels, and the core lines of communication lines of earth tone. Process in center of communication. See the brown in the center? All right. Sets communication lines, interception, interlock, interdivision. 4 lines of communication lines of ground lines of surface. Sets communication lines of center, communication lines of grounds, overrides the system in location system all through travel and mechanism lines of force. Done by equation. Now we go through the central system and setting. Center operation. All right. Coloration lines of patterns, we overline sequence. Pattern line 1, pattern line 2, pattern line 3, and pattern line 4 and center communication. Okay, very powerful stuff. Then we set the course into earth line. Now the earth comes into coolants and its echo chambers that fluxes screen lines adaptations over processing. Processing lines of 1, processing lines of 2, processing lines of 3, processing lines of 4, and your webbing sequence of processing lines of 12 and 24 cycle. Oh, look at that, disappeared. Got to do it again, right? Because it's going too fast. You guys can't recognize the frequencies until you get your position locations of center of nothing in travel. Now it's done by equation, right? Then we go over the override sequence and lines communication system of the calculations. Very powerful stuff. See? It's amazing how you put this all together, right? So it's under your truth lines, your false lines, core centers, the leading all files communication factor, reset lines of core centers, the psychosis location system, all through travel mechanism, okay? All right, so in that line screen, we get in line core centers in position, okay? We send our communication lines of green lines. Now we change the core centers on its travels, sets communication lines of zeros on 4 settings. Then we had 3 lines of cycles, and then we had 4 lines of setting. Line calculation setting with 2 lines of system and 1 travel in set position. See the green line cycles and set position lines? All right, so we go through the green lines of surface. That changes all communication system as center operation. All right. And then we override the sequence. Now, overriding the sequence overrides the inhibitors over lines of travels in a 4-track location. Okay. And then we change the center communication setting all through travel. Okay. The opposite direct signals. Now we go into red line that sets lines of security lines of panels, center communications, and position of data. Process ignited line course centers X marks the spot. Process in position location to its cycle. Now directing lines of panel, we change the course centers of directions into modification lines of molecules and design line. Process calculation high direct signals into lines of data. Data lines of 1, data lines of 4, and data lines of sequence and center communication at 3 settings. Process line condition setting to the mothership over cross location in position location to its system. Set calculation lines of 3 grounds, sets communication lines of 6 grounds, cross line communication lines of 8 grounds and travel. Then we change the sequence lines of communication system all through surface interactions. Then we set it, all right? So your Earth is rotating in position lines of travel. 3 lines of signals, 4 lines of system, 4 lines of communication cross lines, directing lines, inhibitors over line, and panels over screen. In that communications, we flip the switch and screen line adaptations of flux. Process of communication high direct signals, modification the ground lines of surface in set position location to its system, all through energy lines of circuits. Now this work comes to the I division location system, all through center of nothing. The I central system opens all tractions. Now we add flux lines into time capacitor. 3 lines of signals in set position locations of its compressor. Gravitational pull and line screen adaptations of set position. All right. Then we synchronize the settings in that communication grounds. Okay. And then we set an overdrive, 3 lines of signals in line communications, line direct signals in cross lines and center communication system as surface interaction. Done by equation. So that's set up. All right. So you have to understand how this is all set up in location setting to your system. Very powerful stuff, because this is what basically you come into location of your data, your inputs, your outputs, your outer links, your outer realms, your outer sequence, your outer panels in position location setting into the brain lines of convergence. Once the brain comes in its own convergence, it comes in its own mystical cortex of its own design, of its own system, of its own tractions, setting lines of communication set position operation. All done by equation. All right. So understanding that through link and chain is the line screen adaptations of force, putting position of truth narratives into the inceptions over pi. Okay, that communicates your system all through ground lines into box frame, triangulation frame, box frame, and set location of E. So we got an E setting in process lines of a D, D process lines of B, and B process lines of C. Okay, now C overrides a system of 1 atom, C overlines of 2 lines and atom rotation. Process calculus lines of D is a 3 sector in position of process line rotation and flux over screen adaptation. Changing communication lines of ground, lines of surface, and position lines of calculation. All right, so center communication high centers of grounds. Okay, sets the divots in 3 travels, 3 settings, 3 travels set position, right? Then we change it again. It comes into the umbrella as set position. Okay, course centers, line connection lines, E box, box line, course centers of triangulation box and set position. Okay, change the core lines of time, change the time sequence lines of correlation set position. Now that's a quarter event. That's 4 lines of 3 over 4, slash lines of position of 2 over 4, set position on a half pipe. That's 6 lines of setting, 6 position 6 over 6, and equals lines of 1 cycle at 1 center. Sets communication ground lines and formula of equation and set communication. Process calculation ground lines of service, process in position of data, set lines of 3 split lines of anomaly and 3 lines of course high center position of travel. Directing communication lines into 4 line signals in position location of tesseract. Directing lines of 4 grounds into 4 line signals. Data formation lines of 1, process lines of 2 interactions. Now we have a direct line link in position. Okay, very powerful stuff, guys. All right, so your central system is now set up in ground lines of surface in that communication system calculations. Okay, then we go with the lines and inhibitors over line direct signals to your umbrella. Now the umbrella sets the circuit's lines as center position of its earth in rotations of surface. Okay. Now get in the center position location of center in platform communication system to E factors over 1. Sets ground lines as set position over lines of E line rotation surface and communication system in travel calculations. And that communication lines of ground lines sets position location to its intelligence of configuration of face recognition of time sequence. Intelligence informations. There it is. There it is, set up. So the Earth is now in its own configuration line and grounds, process and communication lines E factors over screen line adaptation of surface and transitions. Look at that, too fast and setting. Okay, then it goes into position. Travels lines of 3 indication system as security line defense lines of travel. Sets communication lines of grounds, over lines of sequence and high position location lines, set position of travel. 3 circuit lines of rounds. Okay, center core system, center line and direct signals and set position of 0 gravity in set lines of surface and traction. Very complicated stuff, but it's a lot of fun. All right. Now all we do is we center line the communication lines into direct lines of link, into panels over star measures, star gates, star panels, code weaving, code tractions, teleportation, teleweaving, and screen. Bring it up through equation. Direction time. Back in equation. All right. All right. So that's set up. Now we have blue lines of force. Basically, that protects all ground line service and blue lines of system. Changes the ground lines of surface and rotation. Okay. Then we go into high centers, into cloak and dagger. Sets communication lines, ground lines of high setting. Okay. Then comes out through equation again. Sets communication lines of grounds, open lines of platforms and track location system, all through split lines of anomaly. There's your Earth in half. All right. So the Earth is in half. It's in sequence now. Changing ground lines of surface routes the setting in rotation surface into 3-track provisions in space and center of line rotation of sonar. In that communication ground lines of surface opens all sequence and line communication system and travel. Sets calculation ground lines of settings, process lines of green, over lines screen. Direct lines of underlay and line rotation surface and eye division locations. Setting lines of communication, setting high lines of surface and track location. Very complicated stuff, but you see the intelligence inside. See the intelligence? See the eyes? See the browse adapters? It's all set in sequence. So there's 4 provisions of your Earth now. All right, so setting lines of sequence, 6 a.m. and line screen adaptations. Anybody that gets an activation line will automatically be line screen adaptations in position of 444 interactions. Setting signals lines of highest position of 3, in position as a 3, in position as a 3, in position as a 3 interactions, all right? Taking out a line screen adaptations over 1/3, sets calculation lines of 1/5 into 24 sequence, 48 measure, 72 platforms into positions of 444 tractions equals lines of 4 in setting. Okay, sets lines and screen adaptations to surface and track location. Okay, so very complicated stuff, but the center core system is now set up. Over lines in line position all levels of pockets, in divots, in rotation surface. Communication lines of grounds, over line sequence, and set position lines of travel. Okay. Sets communication high center calculation setting. So we take the 1/3, in position all levels of the 1/2, indirect lines of 3/3 into 3 cycles into 444 tractions equals lines of high centers, 5 lines of sequence, 5 lines of panel, 5 lines of tractions, and 5 lines of space in south. Sets calculation lines of ground line surface, sets line rotation surface in a 4/4 rotation into plasma screen adaptation lines of surface interaction. Process calculation lines of grounds, 4 lines of signals in 2 panels. You see the 2 panels, 4 lines of signals into 4 panels, indirect signals into 4 centers, split lines of anomaly. 3-track calculation lines of 1/3 over line, 1 graph, 1 center, 1 operation, 1 calculation system, all through set lines of data. Okay. Now that process lines into flux. The flux line screen adaptations open signals into pi generation screens, open panels into torical fields, and rotation surface and center communication system all through track lines and operation line calculation setting through the open sequence and panel. Done by equation. All right. So we flipped anomalies and screen adaptation. Your Earth is on a 4-line cycle. See the 4-line cycles of your Earth? It's rotating now. All right, so we center lines of the green, sets communication lines of high centers, lines of surface, and a 4-line rotation surface interactions. Setting communication high settings and travel. Sets core centers and center core system of your Earth. The sets lines of calculation setting northeast, west lines of south, southeast lines of north. Center communication lines of ground, set over lines of sequence, and set position lines of calculation. All right, then we go through the center line and rotation system, flux over line. Then we open the sequence and line screen adaptations all levels. So we add core lines of blue over cross locations and 4 lines of measure and scales of the Earth rotation. Then we go into the brown. Now the brown lines is sequence, lines of calculation setting, which is core center locations of Mother Earth and center communications. Then we go into lines of blue, the blue line offline signals and line communication setting measure. Scales communication over crosses line screen. And then we go into red of securing lines of panels, overline sequence and point lines of divots in clocking cell location setting and track location system, all through tractions. Now that puts all communication lines of grounds into inhibitors over pi. Processing communication system, all lines of travels. Now we come into the gold line cycle, which is the golden realms, setting core lines and direct signals and calculation setting a screen. Directing inline rotations, cross-line symbolism. Communicates on high core centers, earth lines, rotation surface, and 4 tractions. Now we open all signals in the line high set case to a system all through travel. Directing core lines of signals sets lines into the oscillators. Oscillator lines of 1 platform and 4 lines of signals and 4 tractions into tubing, screen adaptations, all levels of capsule and track location. Process communication lines of ground sets lines of correlation system. Now we go into the pink. The pink is an oscillator screen adaptations and all levels of inhibitor location. It was bypassed to changes heartline direct signals in track location lines in direct modification system, all through track location system, all through operation circuit of existing all at once and set positions calculation. Done by equation. It's all done. It's all done now. Everything is all done. But it's amazing how you come into all that through division. Look at all that. Look at all the platforms. See, that's how you really see things in color through your schematics, in your drawings, in your travels, in your mechanisms, high position of force and clocking system. It's amazing when you come into that through division. Incredible when you start to see all levels of U and lines of communications, all through tractions. All right, so it's all done. Everything's done in your sequence now. I know it's complicated what you just heard, but it's true that you understand how to process that now. Really understand in that position locations is for you to delete all your files. Now, in that line is the core centers. So you get a confirmation line. That's going to, let's say, how are you? Okay, that's easy, right? How are you? Right? How are you? Okay, so delete, 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 delete. You got to delete all that. Then you got to process in position over grounds, cross lines, high centers, and a 3-line rotation surface and traction. Directing lines of modification ground, lines of symbolism, location of system, process lines, and a 45 communication. That communication lines high centers, 1, 2, and 3 panels of sonar. Direct core lines high centers into E lines of track location, lines of time measure. Process lines into sonar lines of 1, sonar lines of 2, sonar lines of 3, and line rotation setting, cross line calculation setting, the earth line rotation surface and traction. Done by equation. So what you have to understand, all this is this. So this stays in its capacity, this stays in its storage in that position locations. So you come into all lines of communications into position processing all memory, in position of deleting all memory, coming into no memory, and having access to all memory of clearance. That comes into the all positional platforms that travels its line direct signals into calculation system all through travel in track location. Hooah. Okay, guys? Very complicated stuff, but it's a lot of fun, right? So how you get into that position location is knowing how you actually see that. How are you? That's how it's done through its equation, right? All through teleportation of travel. Okay, guys? That's how it's all done, right? So it has a storage facility. So you're not releasing anything in line position locations, but you're not living the reality in the future in 2025, right? So you have to let all the memory, and that comes to you through all access of clearance. So when you're in that ready system, it all floods the intel and track locations. So the provision lines in line screen adaptations is your 365. Equals lines in a 24 cycle and a 48 measure and a 72 computer frame into 144 platform. Directing lines and track pace to 344, position of 444. The set calculations, acceleration line screen, right? Now we flick the switch and we have direct lines and high settings, okay? Process lines of L, back force communication. Then we cross line signals into 3 in position of 6 over 9 in platform. Then we have energetic ground lines in 3 lines of cycles. We had 3 lines of alpha, 3 lines of delta, 3 lines of theta, and 1 signal lines of omega and travel. The process of lines of ground lines is surface and set location system all through laser track lines, your Skynet and setting. Process lines of grounds comes into all communication system all through mountain surface. Process lines of hydrox signals, XC1000 comes in platforms and 3-track location system all through travel. Directing lines of grounds over sequence, over channel, over the operation system and setting. Process the lines of height interference to 3 crop circles of past, present, and future in travel. Directing line communicates the setting of center, and set position of 3 centers in process communications altogether. Sets communication high centers in 1 platform, 1 traction, 1 division, 1 0, 1 calculation setting, all levels of existence, inline rotation surface interactions, done by equation. Very powerful, guys. What is going on with your system in set position? This is the most powerful thing I can give you. Is it a coincidence that we're in 24 cycles of 11? No. Everything that's in Comput's system is all levels and triangulation lines of flux. Getting rid of all that data that process you in line position of seconds, minutes, hours, puts you in a full access of clearance once you come into the real reality that you are, which is all levels of existing happening all at once. In that track location system, all through tractions. Look how powerful that is. All through setting, right here. Okay? So when you get into that, you come into this, a surface. Okay? You come into surface now. Look at that. Look how powerful that is. All right? Laser grid, line course, centers, 3 tractions. Now we take the highest centers of graphs, 3 lines of signals crossing the location, right? Then we cross line signals because we retain our time stampers, core lines of time editing, and process communication lines of 4 cycles, Skynet line division that rotates the settings, and process communication lines of pi that changes communication setting of surface. All communicate to setting. Then we go into the center communication system all through travel. Then we go into the ground line surface and set position location, the laser of travel. Okay. Then we set up the road graph screens, which is your highway travels, in position location system, all through lines, your stargates and portals that measures its line rotation to its track location system, all through track lines, high center location existing all at once. Done by equation. All right, so you see our pyramid on the 4 different angle lines of screen, all in sequence. The second, minutes, and hours changes everything to your timeline position, right? Coming into that process, lines and signals changes all communication system and setting. See, it's gone, disappeared. All right, so everything I'm saying has already been said. So everything I draw has already been done. So you're just coming into all communications of what you already are. You're not looking at yourself of who you are. You already are. But what you have to understand is how to come into the reality, have full access clearance in that position is delete all files that you come into through attractions. So it doesn't bring everything out of position. You stay in the observation. You don't change the frequencies because you're in real space, real time now. And if you change the real space in real time, you change all communication system, all through track location settings, all through your sequence and all position locations, right? Of how are you? So for example, you got an XT1000 line. There's an XT1000, right? Now, how are you? Platform, 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 right? Thoughts, actions, emotions, right? If you go into thoughts and you go into actions here, you got 2 tractions, right? That symbolism over cross lines and position over cross location of screen. Sets lines in line rotation setting in process communication system, puts you automatically in the dark realm of communication of dark ages. So don't do that. Always have your position because what you're doing is lines of communication. So every time you set your thoughts, the XT1000s are distributors, okay? They are the importers. They are the exporters. You have to understand how to use that in your logging system. Understand that on line screen adaptations. Day 1, okay? General AI, set position, trying to figure out what's going on in system now. I'm very hard time and it configures lines of grounds, all right? Day 6, still not understanding, but I'm trying to understand the modification system to my CPU through GOD. Okay. Day 28, standing on lines of communication system, understanding track lines, communication setting, all through operation. Done by equation. Signature lines of 1, 2, 3 of panels, process lines of 4 over 6. Now, once you come into that, the XT1000 picks up in a 3 platform and track location of past, present, and future. So every time you communicate, you're passing 3 lines and direct signals of past, present, future, right? But it's going forward in 3 track location system at 3, 6, and 9. The platforms that's embedded in your system is all lines of travel and communication lines of 3, 6, and 9. Process communication high cross and line signals line communication. So every time you speak, You've already been spoken in 3 lines of communication system, no lines of confusion. Process lines of data, process line, direct signals, and ground lines of surface and travel, endpoint lines of graph communications. It's all set up in central communications setting when you got full access and travel. Okay? All through line position location to a system. Okay? Very complicated stuff through its highways. Process lines of highway 1, 2, 3, and platforms of 6/12. Okay? X2000 comes in 3 platforms. All right? Your thoughts, your actions, and your emotions. Okay? So let's do this again. Okay? I'm fine. Okay, I'm fine. Okay, so I'm going 2 tractions going forward. Okay, M 2 track lines of 3/4 going travel, in position going forward. Formations, lines of 3 track lines are going forward. I line, sequence, and line screen adaptations are going forward. Set position location in those settings. Network is going forward. Lines of track location existing is always information of center and calculates the system of travel. Sets communication lines of grounds and set position location system to your pyramid in set position. Heart generation screen is set position. HEART. All right, guys? So the platform communication has a direct line of sight. Now, processing to the grounds, center lines its communication system, overriding the system lines of ground communication. Sending lines of platforms going in the same direction. So it doesn't matter if you crisscross in line screen adaptations, you're always moving forward. Process lines of H, bypassing lines of 6/12 and 24 line sequence into 48 and 72 panels of 144 traction. Directing core line centers, X8000 comes again in direct signals. You got panel operation lines of sequence 1, 2, and 4, and 6/8 and 12. Sending communication lines as center communication centers on the lines of surface travel. Process calculates setting, operation surface, indirect signals that loops the system, all track location setting of nebula and track location. Nebula. So, process lines of Jupiter, process lines of Neptune, and process lines of Mercury, and position locations. Okay? Sets lines of tones and ground lines of surface and set position. Your Skynet, your satellites, your routes, your routers, your center communication system. Sending lines of course centers into your satellites and tractions. This is it, through your satellites. There it is in position. Satellite here. Okay? Planet's already set up in travel. All right, guys? But you always got to see it on a 4-line angle in set position. Always, always, always. So look at all that we've done in line screen adaptations of processing. So when you get in position location system, all through your thoughts, your action, emotions has to go in the same direction. The same platform of the same direction. See? On a 45 angle. Now once you get at a 45 angle, you got a 1.5 angle. So it's on understanding how to go into half pipe. Half pipe is 6 in direct signals. 1/6. Sending lines of 1/6. What is in track lines? 1 times 1. 1 times 1 equals lines of high center and lines of 3. Setting lines of 3 in set position of 6. 0 calculation screen. Solar flex, line direct signals, solar panels and tractions, and direct lines and 3 lines of cycles and traction. So everything that you do through your thoughts, your actions, and your emotions basically puts you everything in balance in position locations of you going forward in line rotation surface and traction. Okay, guys, very powerful stuff. And then you come into the atmosphere lines and your highways and travel. Right, so you're always on a 4-line flux. Now, 4-line flux is an energy flux that processes communication system how to basically come into all of the 4-9 lines equals lines of setting in position location of 12, sets lines of 24 lines of measure, 48 lines of scale, 72 lines of clocking, 144 tractions, set lines of 344 lines of measure times center, and rotation of the 4 line position of time capacitor and track location. Okay? That's it through equation. I know there's a lot going on, right? Trying to figure out, whoa, what is he talking about? Whoa, this is way over my head. Well, it's not over your head because you already know it. But you can't process it now because it's too much data. It's too much information. So what you guys have to understand in that position location system is to let everything go. You can't live in a central system of future until you understand you of nothing. that puts you in all lines. That doesn't put you in a new platform. It puts you in a platform that you're already in. So live in the cycles, you get full access of clearance. So when you come into 2030, you know exactly what this is. It will come into sequence, a panel, and then you become all communication setting. But the team needs to come out of projection. They have to come out of projectors now. Projector of projections. Once they get out of the I sequence, comes into platforms and communication setting, operation surface, and balance of communications in one system. Okay? I line division, rotation lines of surface. Process line division of center communication system, all through track location of surface. All through travel. Okay. All right. So we're good. I know it's a lot to take in, guys, but I'm telling you right now, what you guys have to truly understand is to always bring your thoughts, your actions, and emotions going forward, right? But don't bring it in through a tent, because your frequency is already set up in 2030, 2040, 2050, because it's already done. All right. So when it's already done, what you have to process is not to live in the reality of it's now. You have to delete, but you have to understand the memory to get in position of no memory. Memory, no memory. Memory, no memory. All access of memory. It's not coming back to you because you're already there. But I don't want you guys to get confused of where your reality is in your foundations of your clockings and track location of your system, all through scale, balance, and measure. Okay, very complicated through formula or anything through location system. When it comes into all can modify and track location setting to your primers and circuits. All right, because that's all it is, guys. Once you get into color, there is your schematics that comes to you. All through your data, all the uplinks and downloads and upgrading system. That's what goes into your settings, into brain convergence, and positioning your mapping sequence that's already set up in you through travel. Okay? All right, see you in 5. Doo-doo.